February 2019 webinar. This is Spy Curious, the monthly webinar from PI Education for February 2019. I'm Hal Humphreys, your host. Today, elder abuse investigations. When I was in college, my mother had to hire a caregiver to take care of my grandmother. It took a long time for my mom to find someone she was comfortable with to take care of my grandmother during the days, while mom continued to work. It worked out great for about 6 months, and then one day the caregiver just didn't show up. My mother had to take off work. My sister and I took turns going over to grandmom's house to make sure that she was safe during the day. Sometime over the next week, my mom noticed my grandmother's ring, a family heirloom inherited from her mother and her mother before that, looked a little strange. The diamond that usually lived in the setting had been replaced by a shard of glass from a broken Coke bottle. My mother called the police. The town where we lived is a small town, and everybody knows everybody. There aren't that many places to fence a stolen diamond. The man who owned the pawn shop where the lady tried to hawk my grandmother's ring is a longtime family friend. In fact, the diamond in my grandmother's ring was originally part of a pair of diamond earrings. The pawnbroker's family owned the twin. He recognized my grandmother's stone immediately. He called my mom and said, "I think I've got Judith's diamond here." For us, it wasn't that big a deal. No one was physically injured. We were able to solve the problem. The police were able to press charges against the caregiver. It took us another month or so to find someone that mom was comfortable with. But here's the thing. This kind of elder abuse happens all the time, all across the country. Today, we're joined by Kelly Riddle of Kelmar Global. We're talking about nursing home abuse, elder abuse, and nursing home fraud. This kind of investigation can be a lucrative addition to your business. So here we are, the PI Education Monthly Webinar for February 2019. It's free. You get to ask questions of some of the top thought leaders in the PI trade. We get to know a little bit more about you. We're glad you're here. The rules. We are not attorneys. Our opinions are just that, opinions. We're glad to share them in hopes that we can all learn from each other. But we're not attorneys and we don't answer legal questions. If you have a legal question, call a lawyer. We'll take a break about halfway into the hour. That break is my chance to offer you a discount code for your education needs. If you need to leave to take a call or for any other reason, don't worry about missing anything. We keep the recorded webinar up here on our YouTube channel for you to come back to again and again. Go ahead and click on the subscribe button now. It doesn't cost you a thing, and it's a huge help to us. Kelly Riddle, thank you for joining us today.
Absolutely, Hal. Good to be here.
Tell me a little bit about yourself. Tell everybody in the classroom today a little bit about yourself. We want to kind of get an idea of who Kelly Riddle is.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm based in San Antonio. That's where my corporate headquarters is, and lived in Texas, fourth generation Texan, and been a private investigator for almost 40 years, which makes me sound really old. But I've written 10 books, and one of them is on this specific topic that we're going to be dealing with today. And so, we're licensed from California to Florida and up the East Coast and stuff. So we do a lot in a lot of different places.
Awesome. So how many offices does Kelmar have?
Oh, goodness. We probably have about 20 something. And so, we're spread out all over the place. We have, I think, 61 investigators just in Texas.
Oh, good heavens.
Yeah.
Wow. That's a lot of people. When people talk about nursing home abuse and elder abuse and nursing home fraud and things like that, what's the first thing that comes to your mind?
Scams. It's unfortunate because, as you get older, you're not as quick, and you usually we've all seen them. The older people that want to, just communicate with somebody, talk to them, and they're needy, and because of that, they get taken advantage of.
And the story I told at the beginning of this hour, I'd actually talked to my mother about it last week. I went home to Humboldt, Tennessee, to visit my mom and dad, and she was telling me, she said she just felt like she'd been taken advantage of.
Right. Yeah, that's exactly right. Well, point in case, my wife had an uncle had a similar situation where he was, he got this insurance salesman that kept coming by. the guy sold him some just fraudulent gold coins, supposedly. And he told my wife about it. And I told my wife, I said, that's going to put him in danger. And sure enough, 2 days later, he found out that my wife knew about it. 3 days later, he was standing, a masked man was standing at the foot of his bed and had broken into the house and had stolen those coins. And so, we worked with law enforcement, and they were able to pin him down and show that his phone was there at the same time. They had a witness. And so, anyway, he had to repay about $70,000 that he had taken from my wife's uncle. And it's all
Oh,
because he let him in.
that's just crazy. My mom and dad are both in good health, thank God. My dad is going to be 80 years old this year. I do notice them slowing down a little bit. I do notice that you know they're not quite as quick on the uptake sometimes. And God, I hope they don't hear this and get mad at me. But the other thing I've noticed is they do they feel this kind of sense of fear about things, and I think a lot of elderly people feel kind of afraid of a
Mhm.
lot of things, like even simple things like driving around town become kind of frightening.
Yeah.
Traveling becomes kind of frightening. So elderly people, things are slowing down. Our bodies stop performing the way they used to.
Mhm.
I know you and I are both in there's a there's an organization here in Nashville. My best friend told me last year when I turned 50, he said, "We're going to go to 50 Forward. It's an adult daycare center." And he said, "We'll go play shuffleboard." But
Yeah, no.
there's there's a thing that happens when you turn 50, 60 years old. Your body doesn't do the things it used to do, and you still feel like you're 20 something, 30 something years old, but your body doesn't perform the way it used to. So we find ourselves as we get older being a little bit more vulnerable.
Yeah.
What is nursing home abuse? Just kind of walk us through what that looks like.
Well, it can be nursing home abuse or elder care abuse, adult daycare abuse. It all kind of wraps up into one, but essentially it crosses the line into abuse at some point after you have enough neglect, and so in a nursing home, it could be, they're not getting fed properly because they take the tray of warm food and they stop at the first room. They walk in there, and before you know it, it's 15 minutes later because they talk to them and they've got to do all this kind of stuff. The food on that tray is getting old and cold. So by the time they get to the end of the hall, the person doesn't want to eat. So, you know, we all know that nutrition is a big issue for the elderly and stuff. So, that's just one of those things. If you do that continually, it goes from just neglect over into an abuse situation coupled with other stuff, of course.
Right. What is kind of the craziest thing you've seen in a nursing home abuse scenario?
Oh man.
I know we've all seen videos of people beating elderly people,
Mhm.
punching them, stuff like that. Have you seen stuff like that firsthand in your work?
I haven't seen it firsthand, but through subpoenas and depositions and all that stuff, I have seen a lot of that. But we've had them where they, uh, one particular situation, some guy off the street was trying to get out of the cold weather, and he went in a door that was supposed to have been locked, and ended up raping one of the elderly ladies that was there. And then we had another one that the nursing facility was just letting the adults go across a 4-lane busy road in Houston. And they had a convenience store over there, and they all had accounts set up. So they would be, literally in their wheelchairs and their walkers, whatever, crossing this 4-lane. And obviously, somebody got hit by a car. Go figure.
Right, right, right. Kelly, we have a question from the audience. Eric Shanholzer asks, he says he sells Medicare plans, and they have a lot of hoops to jump through in regards to marketing to people who are potential victims, this kind of thing. Are there similar restrictions with marketing PI work in this area?
As far as marketing PI work, no, it's just another type of investigation that you can offer. So, there's not really a specialty in it. There's myself and one other PI, Doug Cruiser, the only two that I know of that has really cut out a niche in that area, and we both have books on the subject. But, as long as you're licensed as a private investigator, you're able to conduct that type of investigation or surveillance or, anything that we're licensed to do.
Okay. And let's talk a little bit about the business of PI work for people that would be interested in getting into this kind of work. Um, is it worth someone's time to get into this business? Is there money to be made as a PI here?
Absolutely. It's I've kind of I started back in 1989. I started this business in 1989, so it'll be 30 years that I've had this business in April. And the transgression, I mean, how it transcended time is kind of amazing to me because you find the next niche. I mean, a lot of PIs start off doing court-appointed cases or cheating spouse cases or whatever. But if the fallacy in this profession is that most people do not treat it like a business, and so they don't market it, they don't do this social media, they don't do the things that you would do in any other business. And if you're not going to do it in another business, it's not going to work in this business either, this profession.
Right. And I'm assuming as a private investigator, if you're seeking this kind of work, there are certain groups that you would want to go to specifically to say, "Hey, I'm here. I'm available to do this kind of work." Who would they be?
Yeah, absolutely. So, first of all, I mean, attorneys, a lot of attorneys in Nashville, Dallas, wherever it is, they have their bar association for the state and for large geographic areas. And they typically have to have continuing education. So you can go to their lunches, you can go to their dinners in some cases, you could be a vendor or sponsor or something of that nature. Same thing with claims adjusters if you're trying to get into insurance fraud, those type of scenarios. So they have claims pages is what they call them. And so I will advertise in the Texas Claims Association or the Dallas Claims Association. One of the reasons I do that is because they give you a copy of the book, and it lists every insurance company, every insurance adjuster, and what that insurance adjuster does. So if they do workers' comp or property, you know how to, you've got a telephone number for them, you've got a name, and you can call them up.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So for nursing home investigations and elder abuse and neglect investigations, who would you go to if you were just starting out in the business personally?
I would try the plaintiff attorneys. Same thing, like I was talking about. You can look up and find out what attorneys specialize in, and so that's what you want to do is find those that specialize in nursing home and elder abuse cases. Because for me, I fell into it accidentally. I had an attorney that called me and he said, "Look, I had another investigator. I gave him a list of 20 people, asked him to go interview him. He only interviewed one person. I need you to go do that." Well, I interviewed 18 out of 20 and got excellent statements. So from that point on, I was his go-to guy. And some of these attorneys, they'll spend $1 million, $2 million working up a case between their experts and their investigators and everything else. So it can be very lucrative.
That's what I was hoping to get to is for the PIs out there that are interested in this work. I think it can be incredibly lucrative work, and not only is it lucrative, we spend a lot of time talking about. I know that when I go to PI conferences and do presentations, a lot of times I'll hear people say, "Oh, I don't do domestic work. I don't do surveillance work. That's beneath me." I don't think anything's really beneath me as far as the work goes. But when
Right.
it comes to this kind of work, it has meaning. It's helping people.
Mhm. Absolutely, I agree with that. And you got to follow the trends and societal trends. We know that there's more people getting older, so therefore you're going to have more types of elder abuse, and we're even seeing, we're unfortunately, I hate to say this, but a lot of times a spouse will pass away, and after a couple of years, the person will get back out on the dating scene. And I've seen them where we've worked cases where they go online and they try that, and they get scammed. And so we're doing a lot of Nigerian spin-off of scams to everybody, but even the elderly.
Right, right, right. Another question from the crowd: what are some of the warning signs of elder abuse and elder neglect?
Mhm. Well, if it's in a nursing home or a hospital, usually it's in a nursing home more so, or an adult daycare. But I always tell people to go do the smell test. If I was going to put one of my relatives in a nursing home, I would not only go during business hours, but I would go after hours in the evenings and do the smell test. Does it smell like urine? Does it smell dirty? I mean, look around, because during the day they have the administrators there and they're doing their marketing just like anybody else would. So look after hours. I did one nursing home where they would do tailgate parties in the evening. I mean, they would literally leave one person in the nursing home, and everybody else would go out and barbecue and do a tailgate.
Holy cow.
Crazy.
That is insane. And I'm sure here's the thing, this work, we can talk about it. You and I can sit here and talk about it kind of in the abstract. We're investigators. We don't really have a dog in the fight unless we're hired to have a dog in the fight. But at the end of the day, if it were your mom or your dad that were in that situation, how much would you be willing to spend to go after the person that hurt your mom or your dad?
Oh, well, and see, that's, I would go to the ends of the earth, obviously, but, in some of the geographic areas like Texas, for instance, I think 3 years ago, they passed a law that said you cannot put a camera in a nursing home facility without first getting the permission, notifying and getting the permission of the nursing home. Well, guess who was behind that law? The nursing homes. And so, if it were me, I would put a covert camera in my parents' room. But what you have to be careful with that is that, if they're sharing a room, you can't get the other person butt naked, because now you're violating their rights. So there's those kind of things that you got to look for. But, I would be checking the nursing home for how many lawsuits they have, how many police calls they've had, those kind of things. Anybody can do that.
Right, right, right. And that's kind of an interesting point. Ryan Johnson just asked, the question I have might be more of a legal nature, but who can authorize the use of hidden video, clock camera, et cetera, in a patient's room, especially if family members are the suspects?
Mhm.
So that's what you were just talking about. If you wanted to put covert cameras in a room, how would you go about that?
Yeah, and that's a sticky situation because of what I just said. More than one person in a room, but again, are you the legal caretaker for that person? Are you, if you have the power of attorney and all that kind of stuff, you have a certain ability to do that. But regardless of that, I know people that I have talked to, and they said, I don't care, if I get a little misdemeanor for putting a camera in there, if I catch the person beating up my parents, so it's that kind of mentality that you got to deal with. I mean, who would not want to protect their loved ones?
Absolutely. And here's the thing. As a private investigator, if someone asked me to put a camera in, I would talk to my attorneys. I would talk to the attorneys who were dealing in that area about what the legalities are of doing a hidden camera. But if I were dealing with personally a situation where my mother or my father were being abused, I might be willing to take a misdemeanor charge for putting a camera in a
Sure,
room.
sure.
I would do whatever I needed to do to take care of them.
Well, for us, it's a touchy situation because we carry licenses, and if we get any kind of misdemeanor or whatever, our PI license could be yanked. So that's our livelihood. So it's a little bit different story for us, but that doesn't mean my brother or my wife or somebody else couldn't do it. And in lieu of a camera, I might say, all right, let's put a voice activated tape recorder in here,
Right, right, right,
and
right, right.
start with that.
Yeah, anything we can do. So another question somebody asked from the field, and I can't see who asked it. Would love to hear Kelly's best tips on interviewing elders who have been traumatized. I think this is a pretty interesting question.
Mhm.
You and I both spend a lot of time conducting interviews. 9 times out of 10, I'm dealing with citizens who are witnesses to something. But in these kind of cases, if you're interviewing elders, do you take someone with you when you're doing an interview? How do you interview the elders?
Yeah, I usually I like to take someone with me, and again, based on the state that I'm doing it in, I will try to record the conversation as well. But what we have to be very careful of as investigators is that we don't get caught up in the fast pace of today's lifestyle because we all want to go in there, we want to do the interview, get out and move on. So, you got to take the time to, talk to the person, get them comfortable with you, just like you would any other interview, and then gently move into that. I've had to interview people that were not able to speak, and so I had to get them to blink once for yes, blink no, twice for no, those kind of scenarios. And part of that is if you have somebody that you suspect has been abusive to a person, then I in that particular situation ask that they bring that suspected employee into the room, and you could just watch the behavior and the mannerisms of the elderly. I mean, they started drawing in and moving away, and so it's typical body language stuff.
Right, right, right. And again, we're dealing with a population that they don't really have a lot of times. All right, so for example, my wife and I do not have children. when we get to be elderly people, who's going to look out for us? You know what I'm saying? It's one of
Mhm.
those things,
Yeah.
like, there are a number of people in that situation. Um, if my mom and dad end up in a nursing home facility and are being taken advantage of, they got my sister, they got my brother-in-law, they got me, they got my wife. People are going to be looking out for them at all times. I know a friend of mine here in Nashville, an attorney friend who is also a client. His mother just passed away recently. She'd spent a lot of time in a nursing facility, and they actually moved her a couple of times until they found a place they were super comfortable with. If you have the resources, that's a possibility, but a lot of people don't have the resources, and elder
Yeah.
care is expensive.
Yeah, it's expensive, and and I've gotten into cases where they're double billing, like they'll be double billing the family and Medicare, Medicaid, whatever, and so uh, it's ridiculous that you got to pay attention to your parent as well as the billing side of things and fraud related to that, So um, some people do the build on a room to their house scenario, and then they are able to care for them or bring in a caregiver. My brother, for instance, he has a mentally and physically handicapped child, and so he has around the clock care. And same scenario. I mean, he has to travel for business, and so from time to time, no one's at the house with his son, and so it opens up different problems, and there's no easy solution, one fit all kind of scenario, because we're just such a transient society and everybody's mobile now.
Right, right. If you had someone come to you and say, "Hey, I think my mom is or my dad is being taken advantage of," what would your first advice be to them?
First thing I'd ask them why, but then secondary to that, I would say we need to check and see what their record is. I mean, there's all kinds of websites out there, healthgrades.com and some other ones, where you can go check and see what kind of complaints they have. You can check and see what their latest inspections, health grades, and state inspections stated. So I would start with the basics and just say, is this a track record that they seem to have? And if so, then you're gonna have to dig deeper.
Right. Um, Greg Mart asks, he's a PI on Long Island. Have you noticed any states or localities that have the most problems with elder abuse at facilities?
Well, Greg, that's you follow the trend, and a lot of people from your part of the world, New York, New Jersey, that kind of, they retire down in Florida, Texas, that kind of stuff. So we seem to have the bulk of it in the South, and it's just, I think it has to do with the amount of population that we have down here, as well as sunshine.
Right.
Hmm.
Yeah, I mean, nobody goes up to Wisconsin to retire.
That's it.
So talking to, I want to go back to the interviewing the elderly who have been traumatized. I know that when I'm getting ready for an interview, pretty much any interview that I do, I spend at the very least a couple hours, sometimes,
Mhm.
upwards of 16 hours preparing for that interview. How much time do you spend preparing for an interview with an elderly person?
Yeah, it depends on the scenario and what it is. If it's a sexual abuse or if it's a physical abuse or whatever the case may be, But typically, like you would do in any interview, you get your ducks in a row, and so you already know who the bad guys are, who the ones that are doing the abusing is. And I always like to try to find someone that they had a good relationship with, whether it was someone else in the nursing home or a staff member, and then bring them kind of in, at least into the conversation, and say, I know that you were friends with Mary, and Mary, is I've talked to her, and she has kind of explained to me that you're apprehensive, and so you bring somebody into the conversation that they are already familiar with and trust.
Have you had situations where the elderly person who was the victim of abuse or neglect was reticent to talk about the neglect, or afraid to talk
Absolutely.
about the abuse?
Yeah, and that's one of the things I covered in our course that you're going to reference. But the problem with that is um, they they get blackballed like any other scenario. So if you're in a nursing home and there's one particular person or a group, there's a niche, and there's a group of people that are doing this consistently, and so they know right away that they either are going to be verbally chastised, physically chastised. They're going to have something taken away from them. They get any money that you give to them usually is going to be stolen. You know, their clothing and belongings, personal belongings, they're going to be handed out if not stolen. So I mean, you know, they learn real quick that there's a hierarchy and a pecking order.
Yeah, and I gotta say, I'm just this is one of those areas of investigation where when you dig into what happens in nursing homes and what happens in elder care facilities,
Mhm.
and even in like private care, if you've got there are companies that do in-home health, elder care.
Mhm.
The things that happen to our elderly population are just astonishing.
I agree. I mean, you know, most of them have worked a full life, you know, and they've raised families and everything else, and so it's just, you know, it's just another humility, source of humility, you know, where you're going to just rake them over the coals. You know, they don't deserve that. They've done well. They've done everything they're supposed to do in life, and they've reached that point, and their bodies, like you said, are just giving out on them. You know, so it doesn't mean that their brain's not working.
Right. And even if their brain isn't working, that doesn't mean that my grandmother suffered from dementia, and she had some very serious issues with, going walkabout and leaving the
Mm-hmm.
nursing home and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean she's not deserving of proper good care and attention.
Well, and you know, you mentioned what would you do as an average person? I mean, look at those things when you go take a stroll through the nursing home. You know, look at their security, physical security. Do they have cameras in the hallways? Do they have push bars? You know, to get in and out of the facility. And are the doors, even if they do have an egress door that is propped open? Is it propped open because someone left it open, or because it's got a bad hinge on it, or whatever? So just look at those kind of things. You know, physical security is easy to look out from the outside, and then also in addition to that, look and see if my mother did escape for some reason and had dementia. You know, is she going to wander out on a main highway? You know, those are the kind of things I'd be looking at.
I have a friend in the public radio world down in Birmingham, and she had a father who was in a care facility. And she asked me a couple of years ago, she said, "What kind of tracking device would you suggest?" Because her dad had gone walkabout and they lost him. He was able to get out of the nursing facility. Do you have any suggestions for that kind of thing?
Yeah, you know, they used to make some real good ones that they had on in watches and stuff, and it was mainly for kids, and but they've stopped manufacturing that. But there's some good ones out that you actually use on luggage, but you got to have access to Wi-Fi and those kind of things. But you know, on a person themselves, it's really difficult to get something small enough that would be there constantly. And so I kind of turn that around. I use that a lot in situations where people are going, my dad is starting, he gets out and drives around, all of a sudden he calls me and he's not sure where he is. So that's where you put a GPS on their car.
Yeah. And have you seen any of the seasons of True Detective, the TV show on HBO?
Yeah, I've seen a few of them. Yeah.
Okay. There's the latest series. It deals with a couple of detectives who are getting older, and one of them is suffering from dementia issues. And it's pretty interesting. A couple times during the thing, he's driven the car somewhere and he can't remember where he is. I remember when my grandmother started, kind of suffering from dementia a little bit worse and worse as she got older. Uh, Getting the car away from her was a very
Yeah.
painful and difficult process.
Yeah. Well, now we do a lot of 18-wheeler and cargo investigations as well. And so they are coming out now with a barcode that actually has GPS in it. And so I've seen it demonstrated, and unfortunately, when I saw it demonstrated, it didn't do a very good job. But that's where things are going. So,
Yeah.
it's not going to be far-fetched to say, all right, I'm going to put a barcode on their shirt, on their robe, or whatever, bottom of their
Right.
shoe, for heaven's sake.
Yeah, that's not a bad idea. Okay, so we're pushing right up against the midpoint of the hour. Um, I do while we're talking about this issue of elder care and elder abuse and elder neglect. One of the things I've noticed is a lot of times older people they're not noticed, they're not paid attention to. And while we were talking about this, I was thinking of a poem that I remembered from childhood. I wanted to read this real quick. It's a very short poem. It's by Shel Silverstein. And it said the little boy. Said the little boy, sometimes I drop my spoon. Said the old man, I do that too. The little boy whispered, I wet my pants. I do that too, laughed the little old man. Said the little boy, I often cry. The old man nodded, so do I. But worst of all, said the little boy, it seems grown-ups don't pay attention to me. And he felt the warmth of a wrinkled old hand. I know what you mean, said the little old man. We tend to put elderly people into a facility and go visit them when it's convenient. And here's the thing: if you're paying attention to your family, if you're paying attention to their situation, you can notice episodes of elder abuse and elder neglect. But we have to pay attention to them. They're human beings, and quite honestly, our parents, our grandparents, they have a lot to offer us in the form of experience and stories and connecting with our past and those kind of things. So it is right at the halfway point. I'm going to pop up here on the screen a quick thing. Kelly, can you see that?
I can. That's nice.
Okay, so um, PI Education, PIeducation.com. If you use the discount code ELDERS, ELDERS, it's not case sensitive, you'll get 15% off the Investigating Nursing Home Abuse course written by Kelly Riddle. Kelly also has a book on the topic of elder abuse and nursing home investigations. I strongly recommend you go to Amazon and pick up a copy of that. It's a fantastic resource for investigators. And again, if you need education for your PI license, or if you just want to learn more about this topic, go to PIeducation.com. Use the discount code ELDERS and take Kelly Riddle's course. I think it's a fantastic course. I've been through it a couple of times here at the PI Education offices, and I can highly recommend it. Kelly, we're back here on the PI Education monthly webinar for February 2019. I've got a couple of questions from the crowd I want to get to first thing. As an investigator, what type of evidence should I be gathering for potential prosecution other than interviews? What kind of things are you looking for to gather as evidence?
Well, part of that is what part in the investigation are you brought into? So, the law firms that I dealt with, as soon as they signed a client up, they would file a lawsuit immediately, and I got where I started coaching other attorneys to do the same thing. So they need to subpoena their employment records, find out who was employed there during the 2 years that the person was there, 3 years, medical records, those kind of things. And so the family can help you with that because they can get access to that. And then secondary to that, what typically usually happens is a person will be taken from the nursing home to a hospital at some point. And you really want to pay attention to the charts because the nursing home is supposed to weigh them every day. And so you're going to see in those charts, most likely, that they're showing them that they weigh 130 pounds, whereas, 2 weeks later, the hospital is showing them at 98. So follow the trail, basically.
So nursing homes are required to weigh the patients, or we call them patients, weigh the person that's staying there. What other kind of things are you looking for in nursing home charts?
So inevitably, I think almost every case I've ever worked, you hear from other employees that used to work there that as soon as that lawsuit was filed, the director of nurses and the registered nurse will go in a room somewhere and they'll get the chart and they'll start going over it. So part of what we have found is the importance of getting who was working on what days is you'll see initials on charts when the person wasn't even working on that particular day. So they're just going in and trying to fix the charts, basically, And
so what you're saying is they will go in and cook the books after the fact.
That's exactly it. Exactly
Oh
it. Yeah. And you'll also see where they'll move people around. So if they've got something that's pretty blatant, a lot of these nursing homes are conglomerations now. So they own 5, 6, 10 nursing homes, and so they will tell everybody, yeah, we had to get rid of that person. Where in actuality, they just moved them to a different location. So when you start to find witnesses and trying to find former employees, go check that same geographic area because they're probably at another nursing home nearby.
Right. And what are some other ways you go about finding former employees and other witnesses? Like if I'm trying to develop a witness list for a case that I'm working on with a lawyer who is suing a nursing home, where do I find witnesses?
So a lot of that is just through former prior lawsuits. And then secondary to that, what we've done in the past is just go do a drive through in the parking lot and get license plates and start running license plates to see. And you check them up against the nursing registry and the CNA, the Certified Nurses Association assistant list, because in most states the CNAs, that's really who you want to talk to, because they're the people, they don't hold a nurse's license per se, they have a certification. They are the ones you want to talk to. They're the ones that are changing the people, cleaning up and all that kind of stuff, and that's where the gold is. They'll tell you the way it really is.
Right, and they usually are, they may not actually have a dog in the fight with the lawsuit, but they're the people that actually spend time with our elders and hold their hand and talk to them and take care of them, so they're more likely
Mhm.
to be helpful. Is that correct?
Absolutely. And once you start getting a couple of CNAs that the best ones are the ones that work there, like, recently quit, or, and because they don't have, like I said, they don't have a dog in the hunt. They don't care. They can't be threatened with their job. So they know all the other employees that used to work there, and most likely they're still in contact with them or know how to contact them. So I've had that happen before. They go, "Oh man, you need to talk to so and so. Hang on a second." They pick up the phone, call them, and say, "Hey, would you meet with this investigator?" So that's a. I mean, this just word of mouth at that point. And so the CNAs are definitely where you want to spend most of your time.
Okay. Now I know I've got some friends at work over in New York, Nardello and Associates. They deal with a lot of class action lawsuits. I know a lot of the time they will go to LinkedIn and Facebook and try and
Mhm.
locate people through those means. Do you ever do that?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, we'll track them that way. And now, with thanks to databases and stuff that PIs have access to, I mean, you can do an address, pop in that address, and it'll show everybody that's ever gotten mail there and used it, as a mail drop or whatever. So a lot of different things to do with that. But typically, what I'll also do is I will go to the state board and I will download the Certified Nurses Association list. And one of the attorneys that I dealt with, he would buy that list every 3 months, and so we could break it down by zip code. And so we go, all right, most likely, they're going to live near the nursing home that they're working at. So
Right.
you just break it down by known factors.
Yeah, that's fantastic. All right. Andy Adams asks, "Hello, all. Great topic. Cell phone apps are good. If you can track their phone, you can usually track them. Are there any cell phone applications that you can think of off the top of your hand that would be useful for folks that are worried about their elder family members?"
Yeah, well, the obvious ones are the friends and family that like AT&T has, so you just friend each other and then you can track them and stuff. But there's some other ones out there. What's it called? Uh, Friends. Oh man, there's two or three of them out there that you can use, and it's to find people that are your friends that are pop up like at a mall or whatever. And man, I just drew a blank, but there's three or four really good ones out there.
Right. And I know that if your mom or dad or grandmother or grandfather has an iPhone, you can turn on the Find My iPhone
Right.
app and you can locate them that way. There are other things you can do. We have not prepped for questions regarding cell phone apps, but I'm sure there are a number of things that we could find
Mhm.
along those lines. And I will say this, and Stephanie, I know Stephanie Mitchell is our director of operations here at PI Education. She keeps the wheels turning, such as it is. Stephanie, if you don't mind, remind me, and we'll put together a list of cell phone apps and tools. Kelly, just kind of, and this is again me just thinking out loud. What are some? Andy Adams says Life 360 is a good one. I'm not familiar with
Yeah,
that app. Have you
that
heard of
is.
Life 360?
Yes, yeah, that is a good one. Very good.
So thanks, Andy, for sharing that. That's fantastic. So we'll put together a list of resources for people that are worried about their elder family members. Let's get back to kind of going through this course outline. We've talked about interviewing witnesses and how to locate witnesses and those kind of things. What kind of questions are you asking these people when you talk to them?
Yeah, so you're talking about the elderly or the employee?
Well, let's talk about the employees, the witnesses first. What kind of things are you asking them?
I usually make some blanket statements right up front, such as, I've done a lot of these type of investigations, and I know that traditionally nursing homes have a problem with having enough staff, and because they don't have enough staff, things don't get done, like feeding on time, checking, see if they're wet, if they're incontinent, if those kind of things. So I make a blanket statement like that, and I'll go. So not all of them are like that. So in your experience in this particular facility, were y'all short staffed? And they'll go, yeah, we're always short staffed, and so, well, why is that? Is it lack of the properly trained people that are available, or is it just because you don't manage the staff properly? And so you start going down the things that because in every nursing home that I've ever worked in, they're always understaffed, and they always blame it on the fact that, well, two people called in sick. Well, that's okay. Staff for that. If you know that two people call in sick on a pretty regular basis, then have alternative staff available. Things of that
Right.
nature.
Right. What other kind of questions are you looking to ask these people? I'm assuming they're kind of like a general approach to the investigation.
Mhm.
How do you approach an investigation into a nursing home?
Yeah, so I pretty much have gotten it. By the time I start doing my interviews, I've already done all my homework. I know they've been involved in a bunch of lawsuits. I know that they've changed directors several times, and so those things tell you something. And so I get all my ducks in a row. I go to the police department. I pull every police call that's ever been made to that, and you'd be shocked what you find. I mean, we've had people where a boyfriend, ex-husband, whatever, comes in the nursing home, starts kicking down doors looking for his wife or whatever, and you get all kinds of violence that spills over into that. So check the police calls to a particular facility, and then do the healthgrades.com and see what kind of audits they've been getting. So do all of that first, and then go find the people that know. And part of that is like, I try not to make any kind of leading blank statements, but in your opinion, how would you grade this facility on 1 to 10? Oh man, 3. It ought to be closed. I've had people tell me that.
I think at this point, I'm just thinking, as you're looking for a place to let your mom or dad or grandmom or granddad spend their last several years or couple of years, and you start doing this kind of research and you start digging into facilities, it might be utterly depressing.
It is very depressing, and we have a tough enough job as private investigators, staying on top of that curve so we don't get affected by a lot of that stuff. But, there's also some new facilities that are coming online that they're trying to make, the hallways when you walk down them, they're making them all different. So like one of them you walk out and it looks like they have a little river running in front of it. Another one looks like it has, a little area for, dogs and cows or whatever, and they're making each one like an independent home within the facility. So they're trying to do some things that are right. Not everybody's bad. But the reality of it is, if you look at most nursing homes, the majority of them were built prior to 1985, and the majority of those were built for one person per room. And so now they've kind of altered those. There's 2 people per room. The facilities are not designed for the amount of people that they have. They're getting old. Just like a house would get. You got to keep up the physical building as well as everything else.
Yeah, and my mind is kind of spinning right now with all the possibilities of, like, you've got older facilities built pre 1985. Just the overwhelming amount of things you need to think about. Steph from the crowd asks, I imagine you must take a lot of photographic evidence. Any tips on what I should photograph? Injuries, living space, things like that. What are you looking to take pictures of?
Well, yeah, you have to be careful with that, simply because, again, if you go into a nursing home, you could inadvertently take pictures of someone that you have no right to take pictures of. And so typically, if a lawsuit's been filed, you're not allowed to go into a facility like that. So it's all from the exterior. And so a lot of what we'll do is document the obvious. There's no lighting at night. There's no security. There's people coming and going all hours of the day and night. And so you build up the whole case of neglect and lack of supervision. So it's kind of a touchy area, because even though you may be in a nursing home, it doesn't mean that all of your rights are taken away. Because I've had administrators tell me that, I can't stop them from walking out and going over to that convenience store. They're an adult. They're still of legal age. They have not been adjudicated, incompetent. So at some point, I cannot stop them. So
Right,
you
right.
double-edged sword.
Yeah, and that's a difficult thing to deal with. I mean, again, talking about my personal experience, my grandmother and her car, um, getting her to relinquish the keys to the car, even when we got her to not drive anymore,
Yeah.
she didn't want to give up the keys. And if you try to tell, I mean, I just shudder to think of you and me living in the same retirement facility at some point in the future, and the shenanigans we might get into.
Oh, man. It's funny because my grandfather and my grandmother were in a nursing facility. My grandfather liked to play pool, and he had a pool table at his house. Well, this particular facility had a pool table, and so he would go steal all the cue sticks and go put them in his room and write his name on it. And then he bought my grandmother her own wheelchair. Well, then he went around and started stealing all the wheelchairs and putting them in her room. So I mean, they do funny things, but at the same time, it's not funny.
Yeah, yeah. You got to laugh at some point. What are some common denominators in abuse? What are some kind of typical things you see?
It's always the same thing. I mean, records are always a problem. You can always look at the records. They don't document properly, and it's because your director of nursing, she's usually never out on the floor. That's all she's doing is charting. And so you have people that are like CNAs. They're not licensed to give medicine. They're not supposed to do any of that kind of stuff. And you'll see CNAs that are doing nurses' jobs and those kind of scenarios. But in the course that you've mentioned and in my book, I mean, there's a list of questions that you should ask people. There's a how-to scenario of how to go investigate. And so it's kind of difficult to put it all in one case. But we had one scenario where it was an adult day facility, and parents could drop their loved ones off during the day, and then 5:30 pick them up. Well, in this particular case, there was an elderly lady, and they had a bus, one of the handicapped buses that would go pick her up at her house. Home health care person would put her on the bus. They would take her to the facility and then bring her home in the afternoon. Well, she had a busted femur, and she was not supposed to be standing up, and the doctor had given her, semi, release, but she still was not supposed to be able to stand up. Well, in this particular case, the home health care person said, when the bus pulled up, bringing her back home, I could hear her moaning. And when I got her off the bus, she had on a house dress, and I started doing an evaluation, and I felt something on her femur, and I moved the house dress back, and the femur was protruding through the skin and sticking out. And so someone had tried to stand her up, and the bone busted, broke through the skin. So my investigation was, go back and talk to all the people that work there. And I happened to interview a lady that worked there whose 16-year-old son was kind of hanging out there during the summer. And he heard us talking, and he stuck his head around the corner, and he said, "Mom, are you talking about Miss So-and-so?" And I said, "Yeah." I said, "Why, did you know her?" And he said, "Yeah, I used to, help out and work there." And he said, "If you'll remember, so-and-so tried to get her up and move her out of the wheelchair onto the sofa so she could watch TV." And he said, "I heard the pop, and no one else, including his mother, had mentioned that."
That is crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah. And again, thinking about nursing home investigations and elder care investigations, um, as private investigators, we're doing this professionally. We're being paid to do a job. But if you think about the person who has been abused or neglected or injured, in terms of if this were my mom,
Mm-hmm.
it becomes personal.
Yeah, it does. And we've had in nursing homes where they had some of the patients, the people that lived in the nursing home facilities, who were doing the laundry. I mean, they're working doing laundry, and they said, well, they needed something to do, well, they worked, 60 years of their life. They don't need to be doing people's laundry.
Yeah, yeah. We got another question from the audience. Says, I have found that most abusers have a criminal background. A good background check on the abuser is essential to good investigation. No?
Mm-hmm. No, I agree with that. I mean, a lot of them do, but also I have found a lot of them that were right off the radar, man. They had looked like the typical employee. We had one facility over in East Texas, and the administrator, I mean, the owner of the facility lived in the nursing home, and she had a small dog that had fleas and everything else, and smoked like a sieve and everything else. Well, she had a criminal history, and she owned the facility, and she lived there. But the person that was, quote, the director of nurses and the manager, had did not have a criminal history. So you still got to look at who owns the property, and part of that also is what were they called 6 months ago? Because once they start getting lawsuits, they change their names, the company name, and they do a DBA and all that kind of stuff. So you always got to track it back.
Yeah. So what you're saying is if a facility gets sued under one name, they'll just do a name change and
Mm-hmm.
maybe change out directors of this and that. And it's the same facility, same people, just a
Mm-hmm.
different name.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So you can't take anything at face value. And another interesting scenario to me is I used to send letters out to state agencies and to nursing homes, and I would tell them, I will come give a free seminar. I'll come do a free evaluation of your facility. And I never had anybody take it up. I did one seminar in Arizona where the state asked me to come, and it was kind of a group on just elder subjects. Had nothing really to do with this topic, but I've never had anybody take me up on it.
That seems crazy to me.
Mm-hmm.
Um, in the course, we cover some common medical terminology. Do you recall off the top of your head any things that you would need to kind of have a familiarity with as a PI as you're looking at these kind of cases as far as medical
Yeah,
terminology and how to deal with stuff like that?
absolutely. Yeah. Well, the obvious things, you got to know what ADON is, assistant director of nurses, director of nurses, CNA, certified nurses assistant, sepsis, all the medical terms that you're going to see. Sepsis just has to do with the breakthrough of skin when you've had a bed sore, and a bed sore is a pressure sore because, if you get bedridden, they're supposed to rotate you and get the pressure off of that area. Well, that will turn into a sepsis, which will actually break through the skin and go all the way down to the bone. And all these things are failure of the facility to aggressively treat it. Because if it's a bed sore, if they will aggressively treat it, they can stop it going any further than that. So there's those reoccurring terminology that you'll have to know.
Right. So going back to the nursing home itself, we've covered kind of nursing home charts and the kind of things you're looking for in there. And I'm assuming if an attorney has filed a lawsuit, the first thing they're going to do is subpoena all these records.
Yeah, they should. I mean, absolutely should. If they don't, then you as an investigator should educate them and ask them to do that. And part of what you also need to do is check the fire marshal's records. Because the fire marshals, they're responsible for the safety of that facility and inspecting that facility. Check the certificate of occupancy to see, are they on record, of having a proper certificate. And I mean, all these kind of things that are typical business scenarios, but they tell you something because, fire marshals need to inspect the facility. Is there fire apparatuses being inspected regularly? Are they failing on a regular basis? Those things tell you stuff.
Right. And there's a paper trail on every bit of that.
Exactly right.
Another personal story. When I was a kid, I'm an Eagle Scout. I went through the entire Boy Scout program as a young man. One of the things I did when I was a Boy Scout is I volunteered at the Humboldt nursing home there in Humboldt, Tennessee. And I was maybe 15 years old, 14 or 15 years old. And I remember my friend Russell and I were there doing our rounds for the day. And we basically would go and spend time with the people and chat with them and hold their hand and basically no caregiving going on, just spending time listening, let them talk. Russell asked if we could stop in and visit with this lady he knew. She was a family friend. We walked in and he shook her and she didn't move. And he called her name a couple times. And it was pretty apparent within a very short period of time that she had passed and she had been dead for some amount of time. I'm not in any way trying to besmirch the character of the Humboldt nursing home. I don't think it was actually called the Humboldt nursing home, but what I'm trying to point out is these facilities, the people that work there are overworked. They're understaffed. There's a lot of stuff going on. And the lady that we stopped in to visit, she had passed away, but it wasn't anybody's fault. It just that kind of thing happens. So not every time somebody passes away in a nursing home, not every time somebody takes a fall in a nursing home, not every time is it necessarily abuse. But have you seen situations where something was kind of explained as this is not a big deal and turns out
Mhm.
later it is abuse?
Yeah, there's a lot of those. And so what'll happen is, we've all been in hospitals and we've all seen the nurses stations with buzzers going off and everything else. So, a lot of these people that are bedridden, they have the buzzer and they're supposed to be clipped on the bed right next to them. And so they want attention. So they'll keep buzzing and buzzing and buzzing. So I've seen where they'll actually take and cut the cord. And so the plug will be plugged into the wall so that it won't activate the sensors, but the cord is not attached. And so you'll see things of that nature. And then there's actually my vice president of my company. He's had a situation where his mother recently fell in the nursing facility. And so what happens is people need assistance getting out of bed. A lot of times they can go to the bathroom, they just need assistance. And so this situation evolved where she wasn't getting the help. They didn't answer the buzzer, so she had to go to the bathroom, slipped and fell. And so that's what you get a lot of, is just because they don't have enough staff to help people when they need help. You have a lot of accidents, and going back to the bed sores and those kind of things. I mean, you'll see in some of the presentations in the courses that we have, some of those bed sores get so bad that you actually get gangrene that sets in. And we had one person that had a leg that was amputated, and the other leg was starting to get in that same type of situation. And I had interviews from employees that were saying, yeah, we were telling the nurses, they needed to do something about that. And again, if you aggressively treat skin irritations and sepsis and those kind of things, you can stop a lot of things. But and doctors, we haven't talked about doctors, but a lot of nursing homes will have one doctor that's on call for the whole facility. And good luck getting him. We have a hard enough time getting our own doctor.
Yeah, and I think I'm going to guess there are, and I don't deal in this area a lot, which is the reason I had you on to talk about this. But I'm going to guess that there are, I know there are certificates that you get per bed, for a facility. I'm going to assume there are minimums required per bed. So if you have X number of beds, you
Yeah.
have to have X number of doctors per bed or something like that. Is that right?
Yeah, it is on site. A lot of it has to do with the type of facility that it is. I mean, is it a, high skill facility? Is it just an assisted living? So a lot of it depends on the technical capabilities of that facility. But as a standard rule of thumb, you're supposed to have a minimum of 1 to 10. So one certified nurse's assistant per 10 patients. And, one director of nurses for a facility, depending on how big the facility is, could require two. And then they have what they call med aids, which are medication aids that give out the medicines. And so they go around us and they're supposed to, give the person a little cup with the medicine in it. And they're supposed to sit there and watch them take the meds and everything else. Well, we've had situations where the person's asleep, so they write down on the chart, yeah, they took it, and then they go sell the drugs out on the street. I mean, there's all kinds of crazy stuff that happens.
So again, this topic, interesting though it is, can be utterly depressing for people who have older parents or are looking at facilities like this. Again, it falls in the category of you just can't think of enough things to tell people not to do. It seems like it would be common sense to check in on people, and if they're bedridden, to move them on a regular basis. If they need medications, provide the medications and make sure they take them. But we live in the world we live in. Um, so I want to take the last couple of minutes. We're literally down to about a minute and a half, 2 minutes. If a nursing home is being sued, is there any chance for private investigators to work on behalf of the nursing home to help them if they haven't done anything wrong to investigate on their behalf?
Well, it certainly should, because I'm sure just like any other kind of medical fraud, there's those people out there that do it as a living. I haven't come across any of those because I'm usually on the other side. But and before I forget, one of the things that people need to do is go visit their relatives in a nursing home, because inevitably most of the employees will tell me, look, we knew that so and so's mother or family wasn't going to come visit them. They lived out of state. They lived in town, but they never showed up. You need to go in, pop in. Let them know that there's someone that cares about them, that kind of stuff. So you can't be absent. But yeah, back to your question. I mean, uh, it's just an evolving scenario, man. Every time I think I've seen it all, I haven't.
And I'm going to say this one more time, and we're just about out of time. We actually hit the 1 hour mark just now. I'm going to go ahead and pop up the window that shows the discount code for your course. This is for Kelly Riddle's course, Investigating Nursing Home Abuse. Um, the discount code is elders, ELDERS. It is not case sensitive. And Kelly just recommended that if you have relatives in a nursing home, go check in on them to at least let the facility know that there's somebody out there that cares about them. Here's the thing, people. If you got people that are in a nursing home, go spend some time with them. It's just a decent, kind human thing to do. Don't put someone that's in your family in a nursing home and not visit them. Kelly, I had my buddy here in Nashville who is an attorney and a client. His mother was in a nursing home. She was kind of slipping down and down and down. I know over the past year and a half, once a day, if not 3 times a day, he would post a picture of him with his mom or his 2 boys with his mom in the nursing home, spending time with her. They've given all of their life to take care of you since you were born. Spend a little time with them.
Absolutely. I think you hit the nail on the head, man. It's your family member and you just can't turn them out. It's not the dignity is just, it's not the thing to do. I've also had people that buy my book and may never read it, but they put it on the nightstand, beside their parent, just because they now know that someone is reading something that has to do with that topic.
That's a fantastic idea. I think, yeah, if you're listening to this webinar and we're going over just a little bit, I'm not terribly worried about it. If you're listening to this webinar and you're not a private investigator, you have a family member who is in a nursing facility, pick up a copy of Kelly Riddle's book on nursing home abuse, put it on the bedside table next to your mom or dad's bed, and let the facility know that you know what's up. Kelly, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate it.
Hal, it's always a pleasure, man. You guys do a great job, and you're right. Stephanie's a big asset. You need to
She's
keep
the
her.
greatest.
Yeah. Thanks, guys.
All right. Thank you. Have a good day.
You too.
Bye-bye.